Hello my beautiful people, my kings and queens, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jai if you are new, and I'm back with another video from TUV, and this is the disturbing truth of freak show. So yeah, sit back, relax, and watch the video.
Thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. More on them later. Freak shows. A part of history that is cruel, full of exploitation, misrepresentation, slavery, abuse, and even kidnappings. Today we're going to be going over performers that suffered one or maybe all of the things I just said to get a better idea of what was going on back in the day. But first we need a little bit of context to what freak shows exactly are. And before we get into that, I do want to let you guys know that the last video was actually taken down for violating community guidelines again. Woohoo! So you guys are probably wondering, Tel, what are you even doing? Like what's going on with YouTube at this point? So at this point, I have Patreon, and you guys can support me there, and it's literally $5, and $5 you get everything. And there's also a $10 tier where that's if you want to be extra nice to me. You don't have to though. $5 you get everything. You get all the taken down videos. They're uncensored, but yeah, it's annoying. But I don't know. I guess I'm always pushing the envelope somehow. I guess I'm just edgy like that. Just kidding. But yeah, I'm letting you guys know. I still got my spirits up. Y'all know YouTube is my only form of revenue.
I mean, speaking of YouTube, it's like weird. Like some videos I will make, it'll probably like I'll violate, but I see somebody else doing the same video type of content, and their videos are still up. So I'm just confused by that. I don't know. It depends who's working, or as far as just the computer.
So I do have my brand and music, but it does suck, and I do want to let you guys know that I do have a Patreon where you can see the Take Me Down videos, and you can talk to me on Discord. It's pretty cool. And I also want to thank the brands that sponsored this channel, because obviously I get a lot of stuff taken down. But speaking of sponsors, I do want to thank today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Do you like saving money? I really hope you said yes, because if you did, well then, let me introduce you to today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that lets you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and overall manage your money better. I love using Rocket Money to set budgets because, guys, I'm not gonna lie, I have an addiction. An addiction of ordering food to my house instead of being a normal person and going to go get groceries. And y'all already know how unnecessarily expensive the food is on there. A cup of water that's usually free will instead be like 52 bucks and you're sold. So with this budget feature, you can analyze your spending habits to create a custom budget that works with your lifestyle. Automatically monitor your spending by categories and get notifications when you're exceeding your limits. It's like having a little devil on your shoulder, except as Rocket Money telling you, hey bruh, you probably shouldn't buy those Crocs. Rocket Money has helped save its customers an average of $720 a year, with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members already using Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/TUV or click the link in the description below to get started for free. And now let's head back to the video. So, freak shows, also known as circus sideshows, began way back in 16th century England. They caught on slowly in time, and by the 1800s, they were full-on recognized as a viable trade. They were particularly seen as those with physical deformities, disabilities, and things of that nature to make quick money, as they couldn't do so anywhere else. Also, this was a time when traveling circuses had become a thing, with caravans moving from village to village, especially targeting seasons when people had money to spend. So there was money to be made. By the 19th and early 20th century, the shows had grown so much. The shows had grown so much that they were at their peak both in England and the US. We're talking about fully successful commercial enterprises like Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. They were running the industry. This was mostly from the 1840s to the 1940s.
That's
a
like
time when
American
raising people with rare attributes, be it mental, physical, or behavioral, was a very profitable thing to do and not really morally frowned upon. We'll come back to that later in the video, but one weird fact that I have to mention here is that back in the 1800s, a time when these circuses really thrived, was also a time very much governed by an anti-disabled people sentiment, sort of like the need to tuck away people with a disability, considering them unsightly and removing them from the streets, highways, and similar public places. In 1881, the city of Chicago, for instance, had in effect an official rule stating that anyone who was, quote, diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object was not allowed in public places, failure to which they would get fined $1 each time they broke the rule. Interestingly, the law allowed these people to be out in public, but only if the context was that they were working at a freak show. This exception was termed a case of exhibition of monsters or freaks of nature. Now, I've used that 1881 Municipal Code of Chicago as just an example, but it's quite representative of what was going on across the US. Denver, Colorado, and Lincoln, Nebraska had, for instance, quickly implemented similar rules in 1889. Anyway, now that we have context, what were some of the exact ways that these rules and perceptions were affecting individual performers? Let's start with the Siamese twins. Siamese twins, also known as conjoined twins, are a pretty unusual occurrence. The chance of them happening is as rare as 1 in 189,000 births. So, given the unlikely chance of their existence, you could probably see why they would end up in a freak show. Two of the popular ones are Daisy and Violet Hilton, and Chang and Ang Bunker. And sadly, in both cases, they experienced really dark times as performers, all thanks to what we just talked about with the regarding perceptions of disabled people in general. Daisy and Violet Hilton, for example, had negativity follow them right from birth. Born in 1908 in England, their mother, Kate Skinner, had gotten them out of wedlock and thought they were, quote, God's punishment for her indiscretions. She wanted nothing to do with them. And it only got worse from there. Mary Hilton, the midwife who took them in, began showcasing them immediately. She made her son-in-law, Meyer Myers, their agent, and they crisscrossed the entire US, being displayed every now and then. They worked under very oppressive conditions, for example, being kept in isolation unless they were performing. And Hilton, their adoptive mom, even allowing spectators to touch them at the place where their bodies were joined. She also apparently, and maybe unsurprisingly, kept all the money they made. And if that wasn't already evil enough, she still forced them to keep performing against their will, whipping them with a belt whenever they, quote, misbehaved. It wasn't until they were age 23 in 1931 that they broke away from Hilton's family by suing Myers, who had taken over custody from Mary Hilton, which again was their adoptive mom. In the case, they got a settlement of $100,000, which, though a tidy sum, was just a fraction of what they had earned throughout all those years of performing. By today's money, that's equivalent of almost $2 million. Luckily, they went on to have a pretty decent career of their own, appearing in movies, Freaks in 1932, and Change for Life in 1950, and even publishing an autobiography. They passed on at age 60 in 1968 from a flu that killed about 100,000 people in the US. Now, that's really all it comes to when we're talking about Daisy and Violet Hilton, but everything they went through wasn't just suffered by them. There was also another pair of conjoined twins. Let's talk about Chang and Ang Bunker. Born in 1811 and hailing from a small town in Bangkok, Thailand, these Siamese twins found themselves in freak shows after Robert Hunter, a Scottish merchant, quote, discovered them. In a rather exploitative deal, he convinced their mother to just take $500 for the entire time they would be touring and entertaining. For context, at the time, as you'll see with some of the other performers that we're going to cover, there were some that made as much as $450 a week. The mother got $500 for letting her conjoined twins go on tour for 3 years, where their boss was making way more.
Only $500 for the 3 years of tour.
She truly got scammed. I also believe the agreement was that beyond this initial amount, it would earn some more as they toured, because it's alleged that they barely saw any money from performances. And to add insult to injury, they were treated very poorly, just like the other twins. For instance, being handled like property despite their very popular act. Eventually, once they hit 21 years of age, they ended their contract with Hunter. And because they never wanted to be in freak shows in the first place, they quit altogether. They mainly expressed dislike to being gawked at by audience members. Now, a rather weird twist in this story is that though they hated the idea of being exploited, right after they quit performing, they went on to buy and run a plantation with slaves. They had about 18 slaves, most of whom had been bought as children. It's just really weird and kind of annoying and ironic that they were being exploited and whatever. Anyway, their ending was rather tragic. Chang resorted to heavy drinking and in 1870 got a stroke. He then caught bronchitis in his sleep in 1874 and died in his sleep. Ang, being conjoined, died just a few hours later. Stephen Bibrowski and Annie Jones. It might be tempting to assume that performers who enjoyed being in freak shows did so from the very start. That, however, wouldn't be true, as Stephen Bibrowski, though loving the act later on, had a very difficult start to his career. Nicknamed Lionel the Lion-Faced Man, Bibrowski had apparently ended up as a performer after being abandoned by his mother, who, rather than raise a baby with such a, quote, unsightly appearance, gave him up to Settle Mayer, a local entrepreneur and financier in Warsaw, Poland. This was back in 1890. The mom, probably with no idea that her son had hypertrichosis or werewolf syndrome, just told people that he became so after his father got mauled by a lion while she was still pregnant. Yeah, I guess people somehow believe that. Now, Settlemeyer, the entrepreneur, simply saw profit potential in Bibrowski and immediately began parading him around Europe for cash, having already nicknamed him Lionel the Lion-Faced Man. Again, just as with the Siamese twins cases, he was drawn into being a performer from a very tender age, age with probably no ability to consent. It actually turned out later, though, that he ended up enjoying the craft, though he did have a dream of being a dentist. Obviously, a very different career path for the savage figure that he was painted out to be. The circuses he had performed for, Barnum and Bailey Circus included, had mainly marketed him as a really fierce being, and of course, as a result, people thought he was so. It wasn't until he settled at New York's Coney Island as a performer, and the people got close to him, that they found out he was actually just a small, intelligent man, even speaking 5 languages, with his own dreams and aspirations. Something worth noting here is that circuses, promoters, and agents seem to have this habit of exaggerating anything for more people to show up. It's like clickbait in these days. And obviously they didn't care as to how that made the performers feel. They would just dehumanize them for more ticket sales. A good example of this, and coincidentally someone who also had the werewolf syndrome, was Annie Jones. Also known as the Bearded Lady, Jones actually attempted to campaign against the use of the word freak when referring to sideshow performers. The general argument was that while they were created differently, that didn't really mean they were not equal or even superior to ordinary beings. Jones gave the example that while she got viewed as a freak, able to cause fright, her fine beard was no different from that of a man, and thus, if she was considered a freak, so should the men with such beards also be. Now, of course, I'm glazing over some of the main details here, but the main point is that performers themselves frowned upon the perception that they were seen as less human. Interestingly, that pushback by Jones actually had some temporary effects. For about 4 years, they were referred to as prodigies instead of freaks, but then the word freak came back like it never left. Now, going back to Jones's act, her personal journey as a performer was also full of exploitation and what we might term as drama. For example, she had been thrown into the performance world at just 9 months of age. Yeah, 9 months of age. She was made to join Barnum and Bailey and was displayed at their exhibition, with her parents getting about $150 per week. Then, by the time she was 5, she had a beard and mustache, which made her really popular. So popular that she got kidnapped by a New York phrenologist who wanted to showcase her at one of his shows. So you can add kidnapping to the long, dark list of what was going on at these shows. She later got found though, and it was easy for the judge to determine who her real parents were, because although the phrenologist claimed to be her parent, the moment Jones saw her actual parents, she ran to them. Jones went on to perform into adulthood, changing her nickname to Bearded Woman, and even attempting a career in music. She, however, died fairly young at just 37. This was in 1902 in Brooklyn after contracting tuberculosis after visiting her mother's home. And actually a really sad fact is that towards the end of her life, she claimed to have known no other life other than that of a freak. George and Willie Muse. We mentioned one kidnapping so far, and just to show you that it wasn't an isolating incident, there's also the case of George and Willie Muse, also known as the Men from Mars. Now, this isn't just a story about kidnapping, because there are a lot of more harrowing details of what the freak show agents and owners actually really thought about their performers, but more on that in a bit. First, the kidnapping. So, aged 6 and 9 in 1899, these brothers got taken from their home in True Vine, Roanoke, Virginia, which was a small sharecropping community battling the racism that was going on in Jim Crow South. Why? Well, the two had albinism, a pretty rare condition at the time, and would obviously fit right into the freak show business. It's unclear as to how exactly they were taken. Some say they were lured with candy, while others think their mother, Harriet Muse, had given them away just momentarily, only for them to never be returned. Either way, the man who took them, James Herman Candy Shelton, a circus promoter, not only made sure they would never return home, but exploited them quite a lot, branding them as Echo and Eco, the ambassadors from Mars. Displayed them across the US from 1899 all the way to 1917. That's 18 entire years of just being on the road, pretending to be from Mars. During this entire time, as we've seen with the other cases, the brothers were not paid. They were just given enough to survive on. And that really hits differently when you realize they would sometimes make as much as $32,000 a day from their act. Then, wages aside, they were often treated as just property because they apparently had moved between managers, being handled by managers Charles Eastman and Robert Stokes and carnivals and such. This was before eventually finding their way back to Shelton. So basically, these promoters, agents, and managers were paying each other to use each other's property as profit. Obviously, property being these disabled humans. They also outrightly had no regard for the performers, marketing them as anything that would get audiences. The brothers, for instance, were marketed as Ethiopian monkey men, the Eastman's monkey men, and the ministers from Dahomey. This was under different managers, but they all just had to give it a good demeaning twist to get those ticket sales. Worse still, to sort of complete the narrative, they were forced to bite the heads off snakes and eat raw meat, obviously in order to impress the crowds. And again, as we've seen with some of the other cases, and we'll see later in this video, this marketing completely diminished the true self of these performers and ignored what they were maybe better at. Shelton himself was, for example, surprised to later learn that Willie, one of the brothers, could not only play musical instruments, but also easily replicate any song after listening to it just once. But he didn't really care for all that because he went on to strike a deal with Al G. Barnes, a circus owner, to have the brothers attached as sideshows. Oh, and when the brothers asked and cried for their family, Shelton lied to them, telling them that their mother was dead, claiming there's no use even asking about her. However, all that time she had been desperately trying to find them. And this was already difficult, being that she was already a black woman battling a bias system in the South. Nobody even took her seriously when she spoke about the kidnapping. It wasn't until 1927, when the brothers were in their mid-30s, that they got reunited with her, much to the objection of Shelton. This happened when they had gone to a circus in their hometown, and just by chance, spotted her in the crowds and instantly recognized her. Having known no other life though, a year later, they signed a better deal with Shelton, where they got paid their fair wage, though he'd still steal them from time to time. They did, however, ditch him completely in 1936. Surprisingly here is that circumstances forced them to keep working with a man who not only kidnapped them as kids, but stole them for years. There's actually no mention to of whether or not he paid them
kidnapping, exploiting them.
The two worked until the 1950s before retiring in Roanoke, Virginia. George died in 1972 of heart failure, while Willie died in 2001, aged 108.
Wait, what?
Willie died in 2001, aged 108. Of heart failure, while Willie died in 2001, aged 108.
808.
While Willie died in 2001, aged 108. Joyce.
I thought he said he lived to 808. I was like, well, that is bizarre. Oh, he said 108. Okay.
So far, it's obvious that circus sideshows, aka freak shows, had a lot of exploitation baked into them. However, even by those standards, when no one seemed to question these immoral attractions, there were still some incidents that rubbed people the wrong way. One such incident is the case of Joyce Hetz, an elderly blind and paralyzed slave woman that P.T. Barnum, the founder of Barnum and Bailey Circus, allegedly bought for $1,000 for fabricating such elaborate lies about her that abolitionists came forth to condemn the whole thing as exploitation of a poor old slave for a profit. Some members too also repulsed by the idea or banned their congregations from attending these bizarre shows. So first, what were the lies about this poor old woman? The story that P.T. Barnum was peddling was that Head was a 161-year-old nurse who took care of young George Washington. He had sort of come up with this story partly because one of Head's previous owners had mentioned that she could have a connection to Washington. That was it. That was it. He just spun that and was like, that was George Washington's nanny. Barnum had bought her in 1835 from a man known as R.W. Lindsay. He was from Kentucky, and he had also bought her earlier from another guy, John S. Bowling. This last guy, Bowling, had marketed her as having a connection with America's first president. However, neither of these two owners had much success as Barnum because of the sheer amount of lies he came up with. And to be fair, the dude had his charisma, which I'm sure wowed a lot of people, but it was mostly the lies. In one example, he had described Heth as weighing just 46 pounds, that she was blind, had no teeth, had deeply wrinkled skin, and her nails curled out like the talons of a bird. But the main thing that got the audience's attraction was her connection to Washington. Barnum even allegedly relied on a fake contract from Bowling, showing that Heth had been owned by Augustine Washington, George Washington's father, in 1927, 5 years before George was born. To complete the lies while performing, Heth was made to tell stories of youthful George Washington. Of course, all of them being the fabrication of Barnum. And it seemed even the media had decided to play along because in one interview published by the New York Herald, Heth's parts were presented in a dialect reflective of the 1700s. Now, probably the worst part of the story, yes, this somehow gets worse, is that after Heth died in 1836, Barnum still used her to make profit. Now you're probably asking, if she died, what could he possibly have done to milk her death? He held a public autopsy where he charged spectators 50 cents to watch. Now, over and beyond that, there's a floating claim stemming from historian Mary V. Thompson's analysis that the reason the public was so bent on believing the woman was over 150 years old and had nursed a president is that, at the time, sectional differences leading up to the Civil War were really escalating. People needed to believe in an earlier, purer time, and George Washington was nothing short of a symbol of patriotism and harmony. But again, all this came at a very steep cost to Heth's dignity and humanity. According to Thompson, the historian, Barnum really just turned Heth's life into a historical caricature, all for a freak show. Fedor Jeftichu. So we've already spoken about George and Willie Muse, the kidnapped brothers from Virginia who were forced to do horrible things, and I say that because this next case, that of Fedor Jeftichu, is further evidence of the kind of dark tactics that were at play in freak shows. The main thing about Jeff, which I'm going to be referring to him as Jeff, a performer from Russia born in 1868, was the nickname he was given. Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy, and also just Dog-Faced Boy. This description was all the work of P.T. Barnum, the same man behind Joyce Head. Barnum had brought him to the U.S. when he was just 16, having seen he fit the bill to be in the circus sideshows. How so? Well, since the time he was young, Jeff had an excessive amount of hair all over his body as he suffered from werewolf syndrome, the same condition that Annie Jones, the bearded lady, and Stephen Dabrowski, aka Lionel the Lion-Faced Man, had. This meant that Jeff was as attractive to audiences as these other performers had been, and clearly in what was a pattern, Barnum gave him a weird backstory as a marketing tactic with no regard to what the truth was. He, for instance, claimed that Jeff had been captured by a hunter while living with his father in a cave in a forest. He depicted Jeff's father as a savage who couldn't be killed by the hunter and thus was killed by said hunter. The truth was that Jeff's father, having the same condition, had performed in freak shows just like his son, the wild man from the Kostroma forest, but sadly drunk himself to death with all the money he was making. The point though is that Jeff ended up with a demeaning nickname and an even more demeaning backstory. I can't tell which is more demeaning. And this particularly stands out as you realize Jeff was actually really intelligent. So intelligent that Barnum himself even thought he was one of the smartest freaks he had in over 50 years, but I really don't care about this dude's opinion if that was his whole thing. Jeff actually spoke multiple languages, and all that was never really emphasized though. Jeff only mattered to Barnum due to his appearance, and unfortunately, he was even made to act it out. How? Well, it's for instance claimed that he was forced to bark like a dog while on stage. Barnum would apparently tell audiences that when upset, Jeff would bark and growl, and so to complete the act, Jeff had to do so. Anyway, Jeff ended up passing on in 1904 while in Greece, aged just 35. The cause of his death was pneumonia. Now, if it's any consolation, Jeff was actually one of the highest paid performers at the time, earning about $500 weekly, which is about 16,000 US dollars in today's money. Obviously, that doesn't in any way justify it, but at least the man was making some money. He had about $300,000 in retirement savings, which is equivalent to $9.5 million today. Myrtle Corbin. Now, talking about being highly paid, the case of Myrtle Corbin also comes up as she earned about $450 a week due to her popularity. The sad part though is that, like some of the other ones we've spoken about, she got into the business at a very young age. Now, what do I mean by very young? Maybe 5 years old, 4 years old, 3, 2, 1? No, 1 month. Yes, 1 month old. Her own father was showing her off to curious neighbors for a dime. By age 14, she had joined the Barnum and London Tours, owned by P.T. Barnum, who I'm sure you know of now. She also later went on to perform with Ringling Brothers and New York's Coney Island, and surprisingly, all this was accomplished from ages 14 to 18. After 18, she retired. Now, what's also really strange with Corbin is the lengths people would go just to have her. For instance, when she passed on in 1982, her casket had to apparently be covered in concrete to prevent grave robbers from stealing her corpse. Family members had to quite literally take turns watching it until the concrete had settled and dried. No idea why they didn't just cremate her, but I'm just a random dude talking about this years in the future. It turns out that quite a few private collectors and even medical practitioners had offered lucrative financial compensation to anyone who would deliver her corpse. Also, when she was alive, circuses really wanted to have her so bad that some even brought on fake acts that falsified performances. So, what had been so special about her? Well, she had been born a dipagus. This meant that she had 2 pelvises, side by side, and 4 legs. So, a total of 4 legs, with her inner legs being too small for walking, though she could move them, and the outer legs well developed for normal use. She also had 2 sets of internal and external reproductive anatomies. It was actually rumored that 3 of her children had been born from 1 set of organs and 2 from the other set. Probably lucky for her, Corbin did not perform in freak shows for too long because after retiring at age 18, she never went back. She instead got married at 19 and focused on raising her family. She would later pass on at age 59 from a skin infection. William Henry Johnson. As we've seen in these previous cases, a lot of these people were given this savage backstory. Now, I think how society back then found all that okay and entertaining remains a bugging question, because even while researching this topic, I found an entire scientific study dedicated to trying to figure out the reasoning and moral motivation behind the whole freak show obsession of the 1800s and 1900s. And one of the cases covered in the study, as an example, is that of William Henry Johnson. Thought to have been born in 1857 in New Jersey, Johnson was one of 6 children in a very poor African-American family and had been born with a condition called microcephaly. This condition made his head develop at a significantly slower pace than the rest of his body and appear narrow on one end since the bones of the skull were sort of thinning. The medical description is tapering cranium. The condition was also associated with mental impairment, though it wasn't certain if this was evident in Johnson. Based on his appearance, Johnson, in the usual demeaning fashion of the shows, was nicknamed Pinhead or Zip the Pinhead. The Zip Bit name came from Zip, C-O-O-N, a character in theater plays at the time. The plays were known to perpetuate negative stereotypes on black people. Anyway, back to the scientific study. The emphasis is on the fact that he was featured on P.T. Barnum's shows as a subhuman. He was displayed as one of the original What Is It freaks. Yes, they had a section titled What Is It?, where Barnum, rather than lay out facts, would use provocative language to draw audiences to answer the question for themselves. That's once they saw the exhibits, of course. Apparently, that whole section came about during a time when Charles Darwin published the book Origins of Species. So, Barnum was sort of riding the wave. However, what is it freaks? Yes, they shows as a subhuman. He was displayed as one of the original What Is It freaks. Yes, they had a section titled What Is It?, where Barnum, rather than lay out facts, would use provocative language to draw audiences to answer the question for themselves. That's once they saw the exhibits, of course. Apparently, that whole section came about during a time when Charles Darwin published the book Origins of Species. So, Barnum was sort of riding the wave. However, again, the larger issue was the dehumanization of performers. Johnson's fake backstory, for example, was that he was captured by adventurers who were in search of a gorilla around River Gambia. He was said to have been part of a new species, a group of 6 beings that hadn't been seen before. The 6 were said to have been found roving around tree branches in a manner similar to monkeys around the orang-outang. The adventurers captured 3 of the 6, with Johnson being the only survivor after the whole ordeal. Further descriptions in his backstory, and even more demeaning, were that he had originally been walking on all 4s, and that his food had been raw meat, sweet apples, oranges, nuts, and such. He had even been called Dean of the Freaks and Monkey Man. An advert in one of the shows by Barnum also read that while he, Johnson, had some features resembling humans, some others, like his head, feet, and legs, were like the orang-outang. This, in addition to all else we've mentioned, helped spin the narrative that he was somehow the missing link from humans and apes. And just like we saw with Jeff being forced to act out his description, the same thing happened with Johnson. That meant he would be revealed in a cage and made to rattle the bars and screech. In response, he would be laughed at, pelted with coins, and called the cross between the N-word and a baboon. Also worse, since his career spanned over 60 years, he endured all this for so long that he was regarded to as the most famous freak in the world. And lastly, over and above all that we've covered, he was apparently silenced by Barnum regarding his true backstory by being threatened that he'd be denied his $1 a day salary. Johnson passed on in 1926 due to bronchitis and is said to have performed until the very end. Isaac W. Sprague. Now, just to round this all up, it seems that for most performers, enduring tough work conditions and retiring, specifically retiring a mess, wasn't uncommon. And maybe no case speaks more to that than that of Isaac W. Sprague. Isaac joined Barnum's freak show in his 20s, having been desperate to find work and having no luck anywhere. Barnum had agreed to take him in for $80 a week, and was also desperate to build back up with new acts after his museum caught on fire and was destroyed. Now, the thing about Isaac is that he had a pretty rare condition that meant working on the road was quite draining. And honestly, I think this is a little too much to show on YouTube. Y'all know I'm already kind of scared from getting my videos taken down pretty frequently, but just imagine a very skinny man, a very small and skinny man, okay? I don't want to show that because I think they would claim it's like self-harm or something, because you guys know what I mean. You guys can look up his name on Google, you can do that too. Anyway, he had progressive muscular atrophy, though at the time he hadn't been properly diagnosed and no one really knew what he had. He had simply developed normally up until the age of 12 before he began to rapidly, alarmingly lose weight despite being a very healthy eater. In adulthood, he weighed about 43 pounds, while being was quite draining. And honestly, I think Isaac joined Barnum's freak show in his 20s, having been desperate to find work and having no luck anywhere. Barnum had agreed to take him in for $80 a week, and was also desperate to build back up with new acts after his museum caught on fire and was destroyed. Now, the thing about Isaac is that he had a pretty rare condition that meant working on the road was quite draining. And honestly, I think this is a little too much to show on YouTube. Y'all know I'm already kind of scared from getting my videos taken down pretty frequently, but just imagine a very skinny man, a very small and skinny man, okay? I don't want to show that because I think they would claim it's like self-harm or something, because you guys know what I mean. You guys can look up his name on Google. You can do that too. Anyway, he had progressive muscular atrophy, though at the time he hadn't been properly diagnosed and no one really knew what he had. He had simply developed normally up until the age of 12 before he began to rapidly, alarmingly lose weight despite being a very healthy eater. In adulthood, he weighed about 43 pounds while being 5'6". As his condition got worse, he had to carry a flask of milk around his neck just to be malnourished. So you can probably imagine how difficult his life was already with the condition and not even wanting to be a part of freak shows, but that's the only way he could have made money. Again, like the making money part, that's for all of these people. Maybe not bearded woman, maybe she could have like shaved it and like blended it in society, but again guys, I'm a random 22-year-old telling you guys stories that I find interesting. Anyway, he sadly passed away, though earning a decent wage through his Skeleton Man performance and enduring a medical condition. He died in poverty in 1887. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video.
Man, leave
Make sure to
people
leave a
alone.
like if
Let
you
them
enjoyed.
be.
I don't really make like goals, but man, let's just say, damn, I don't know how this video is gonna do. 30k likes. That's not that crazy. So leave a like button. It actually lets me know I'm doing something right. And if you aren't subscribed, make sure to subscribe. That's really it. If you want to see more of my life, go follow me on Instagram, Twitter, all that. And I'll see you guys next time I upload.
He was very messed up with it, what they was going through. You like using me as a prop, using me for your show, and me not getting the good money, not just the money, just my whole self-respect and just everything in general. Anyway, but yeah, rest in peace to these people, and yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, leave me any suggestions down below or what I should react to, and at the end of the day, stay awesome, stay positive, and everything will be in the description below. The TUV channel, the original video, and everything else of mine on my social medias, my music as well. So until next time, stay grateful, stay blessed, and peace.